All right, today my presentation is Carnivore 101 to 401 plus. I'm presenting on carnivore topics for everyone listening who may be on a spectrum from advanced carnivores doing this for years or even decades to have just heard of carnivore and I'm starting to dabble in it. I'm a carnivore beginner, and I hope everyone can take something from this presentation. I'll spend a little bit of time on the 101 and beginners tips, but mostly just provide resources for those folks. And then a lot more of the presentation will be on the 401 plus, the more advanced topics, which I find more interesting and hopefully everyone can take something away from. So this is what I've learned from 2 years and over 100 episodes of podcasting. And my name is Scott Myslinski, and my brand, my podcast is the Carnivore Cast. You can find me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or at carnivorecast.com, also on YouTube. So who am I? That's me in my kitchen eating some burgers and sardines, enjoying my Carnivore Cast apron. Again, Scott Myslinski, host of the Carnivore Cast, and I'm 27 years old. I've been carnivore for over 3 years, and I was meat-based keto before then. I basically just didn't know that you're supposed to restrict protein sometimes. So I was just eating a lot of meat and very few carbs. I live in Boston, Massachusetts with my wife, and she's also a carnivore, and then our puppy, who is a mini Labradoodle who eats an all-meat raw food diet as well. So 3 happy carnivores. So why did I start carnivore diet? A lot of it came from inspiration from this man, Ash Simmons. He's also known as @Carnivore's Creed, I believe, on Twitter. And High Stakes is his handle, and his website, highstakes.com. He's blogged a lot about carnivore diet, calories in, calories out, the need for fiber. Basically, he wrote a book, I believe, called Ketogenica, something like that, which has been around for years. But he's been on a carnivore diet for over 2 decades, and very scientific mind. And I was inspired by him. The time was about October of 2016 when I embarked on a carnivore diet. And Amber O'Hearn had just been on the 2 Keto Dudes podcast. She's a decades-long carnivore and was talking about not only that plants can be harmful, but there isn't a lot of evidence that we actually need them. A lot of it is just the same epidemiology that tells us fat is bad. And then Shawn Baker was starting to undergo his very first carnivore experiments. So the world was a very different place with regards to carnivore. There was a lot less information out there, a lot of the great useful information that exists today. And so I was kind of troubleshooting and making a lot of mistakes along the way too, which I try to share on my podcast. So I had poor metabolic health, digestive issues, and energy issues. A lot of this was probably due to not because I wasn't carnivore, but other things I was doing wrong with my diet and my health. I wasn't overweight per se, but I was about 20%, maybe north of 20% body fat at 5'10" and 155 pounds. So definitely very under-muscled, had digestive issues where I couldn't tolerate a lot of food, frequent stomach upset, waking up in the middle of the night with stomach upset, and then my energy just waxed and waned a lot and wasn't very consistent. So starting a carnivore diet, I improved my body composition substantially. I lost fat, I built muscle, my digestion has improved a lot. My mood is better. I smile a lot more. I'm calmer. I can handle stressful situations better. My meals are super simple. As everyone knows, on a carnivore diet, cooking is easy. Shopping is easy. I'm more satisfied between meals for sure. And then my lipids were never bad, but my lipid profile has improved. My HDL has gone up, and my triglycerides have gone very low in the 30s. What didn't improve, I like to be transparent. Carnivore isn't a cure-all. My sleep didn't really get much better on carnivore. I find I can get by with less sleep a lot more easily. I've been able to drop caffeine entirely and still feel the same amount of energy without it. But I still sleep pretty poorly, so I'm still trying to figure that out. So Carnivore 101. I think Amber O'Hearn, with her site and her guide, empira.ca, you can find it online, details this really well. She says, eat meat, not too little, mostly fat, which I think is great guidance. And it's a play on eat food, not too much, mostly plants, but which I forget who said that. But it's very true. You know, when you're starting out, you want to make sure that you're eating enough food. A lot of people start under eating, and a lot of people also eat too lean. So you don't want to start with chicken breast or fish or turkey. You want to make sure you're eating fatty ruminant meat, especially to start. I also encourage people when they're first starting out, intermittent fasting can be helpful for many people, and a lot of people naturally move towards intermittent fasting over time when following a carnivore or ketogenic diet. But I wouldn't encourage people to start with that intentionally. I'd say eat to satiety, eat as many times during the day as you feel you need to, eat big meals, but don't intentionally fast. And then salt your food to taste. You know, you want to make sure you're getting enough electrolytes. A lot of people don't when they start, and they get cramps and headaches and sleeping problems. Rob Wolf has talked extensively about a lot of the problems with underdosing electrolytes. So just make sure you're salting your food heavily. You can use some spices or fun foods like bacon, cheese to start if you need, maybe some low sugar jerky. I think here I wouldn't let perfect be the enemy of the good. If those foods help you comply, help you get started and get going, then please include those, you know, heavy cream, if that's what's going to make the difference between you trying carnivore and not trying carnivore. And then make sure you're giving your body time to rest and recover. If you're a CrossFit athlete, working out 6 times a week, running, doing a lot of glycolytic activity, maybe calm that down for a couple of weeks when you try carnivore at first, because your body is already undergoing a lot of stress, depleting its glucose, switching over to fat burning, entering ketosis. Even if you're coming from a ketogenic diet, it can be stressful. So think about toning down your training a little bit. And then lastly, find community support. I think this is so important. This is a big reason I started the podcast. And there are a lot of excellent Facebook groups, but it can be super easy to feel isolated on a carnivore diet, like you're the only person in the world doing it. And I think it's fantastic to find people you can connect with, ask questions, troubleshoot, and I'll provide some of those resources at the end too. But these are just some basic tips for getting started on carnivore. I also have a picture here of Judy Cho. She's at Nutrition with Judy. She's a nutritional therapist, and she has a great carnivore diet beginner's guide. There are others out there, but this is just one I wanted to highlight. So moving on a little bit, Carnivore 201, what are some of the things that come up beyond the 101 level? So these are some common questions I get. People ask about digestive issues, energy, especially when they're transitioning, how much to eat, how many meals should I have, should I fast, how much beef should I eat versus other animals? Is it okay to eat chicken, turkey, fish, pork? Do I have to drop coffee? So I'm not going to answer all of these questions, obviously. This would just become a very long lecture on carnivore. But these are some of the common questions I get. And this is what I would classify as sort of the 201 topics. And you can see here on the right, there's some meal plans by Carnivore Aurelius, and another one I found online to make things easier for people. But generally, you know, these are the questions people start to ask once they're a month or two in, and some of the things that people encounter. So Carnivore 301, people start asking some more nuanced questions. Can I use spices? What spices are okay? Are eggs and bacon okay? Dairy? And I show a picture here of Kevin Stock in his website, meat.health. He has a lot of excellent guides for carnivore, free 30-day getting started guide, a lot of articles about symptoms and cures on the carnivore diet. He's a great resource for answers to some of these questions. Grass-fed versus grass-finished, that's a big question for debate among a lot of people. How should I cook my meat? What cooking methods are best? Should I eat raw meat? How much electrolytes do I need? Which types? Should I supplement with anything? You know, magnesium, digestive enzymes. So these are some of the more advanced topics that people start to explore once they've been trying the diet longer. And again, these are some of the things I explore on my podcast. I'm not going to go into each of them, but just wanted to talk about the evolution of carnivore. And then I'll give an example here. Organs is a big one people ask about in debate. So for each of these topics, there's a lot of different lenses you can take. So I'm just going to take one as an example of, do you need to eat organs on a carnivore diet? So there's the Shawn Baker view of the world, which is, I'm not displaying any micronutrient deficiencies. I feel great. I'm performing great. I don't like organs. Why should I eat them? Show me how I would be deficient if I didn't eat organs. A lot of long-term carnivores who have been doing this for years, like the Andersons, been carnivores for over 20 years, don't eat any organs. And why do they seem so disgusting if they're so important? Then there's people like Paul Saladino who take a very biochemical lens, an evolutionary lens, and believe that we should be eating nose to tail. We should be eating the whole animal. There are a lot of essential nutrients that we wouldn't otherwise get from muscle meat that we need to eat the organs. So you can take the ancestral view. You can say, how did our ancestors eat? You can look at this from a biochemical or nutrient view, but again, there are problems there because a lot of nutrient recommendations aren't based on carnivores. They're based on people eating a mixed diet or a standard American diet. A lot of them have just weak evidence in general. You can take an empirical view. You can say, what do long-term carnivores do? What do people who are successful on the carnivore diet do? Shawn Baker has polled thousands of carnivores, and a lot of them don't eat organs, to be fair. And then, lastly is you could try it yourself. You could try, a month with organs, a month without organs, different types of organs. Do you notice a difference in how you feel? I think this is really the best way to get answers to a lot of these questions, because there may be for grass-fed versus grain-finished versus grass-finished meat, there may be not a huge nutritional difference on paper. There may be, not a huge difference in cost. There may be a huge difference in cost. There may be a difference in taste. But trying it for yourself, some people would say, I feel phenomenal when I eat only grass-finished. Some people would say, I feel lethargic. Grass-finished bothers me. So I think that's really the answer to a lot of these questions. And that brings me to my next point, which is I think a lot of carnivores eventually just realize that rather than debating these topics endlessly, they need to try it themselves. So I have a picture here of Tim Ferriss. He is, in my mind, the master of self-experimentation and calls himself the human guinea pig because he's famous for trying a lot of things on himself. This is a big reason I started the podcast, because I didn't want to proselytize about everyone should be on a carnivore diet. No matter what diet you're on, as long as it's working for you, I think, keep going. If you notice that you don't feel as good as you'd like to, you don't look as good as you'd like to, you're not performing as well as you'd like to, you should experiment. And the purpose of my podcast in a lot of ways is to open up people's minds and say, hey, this worked for someone else who has my same issue, or this is working for a lot of people who have diabetes, PCOS, etc. Maybe I should try it for 30 days. Maybe I should see how it makes me feel. So this can answer a lot of these common questions around things like dairy and spices and coffee. Do you need to exclude it? Why don't you try 30 days without it? Why don't you try 60 days without it? Even 2 weeks, see if it makes a difference for you. And people have really unique experiences with a lot of these things. So I think there are people who can thrive with a variety of different flavors of carnivore, and I'll get into some of that. But I think that just means that, unfortunately, there's no black and white answer for some of these things. You have to try it. And there's a lack of science, too, around a lot of these topics. There isn't a randomized controlled trial of thousands of carnivores who only ate grain-finished meat and thousands who only ate grass-finished, and complete, side-by-side comparisons of their health outcomes. That's never going to exist. So if you're waiting for that study, you're going to be dead before it comes out. Most importantly, as I said, carnivore is not black or white. So a lot of people think about carnivore, and this is something that frustrates me a little bit about carnivore space. And I see a lot of people, to be fair, who don't view it this way. But a lot of people are starting to think of carnivore as you're either a carnivore or you're eating a bunch of processed food, bags of sugar, vegetables and seed oils, and you're either on the plan or you're off the plan. But really, I view it as a spectrum. So I have this graphic here from, I think this is from, actually, I don't want to miscite it, but shows everywhere from low carb on one end of the spectrum, people eating meat, vegetables, dairy, maybe some nuts and seeds, maybe some plant fats like olive oil, to strict carnivores on the other side, who are 100% animal-based, nose to tail. They eat meat, salt, water. no spices, no coffee and tea. And then there are people all the way in between, people who are animal-based, people who are carnivore but have some of these things like coffee, maybe include some keto foods. And the word carnivore really fundamentally means someone who eats meat. That's what it means in biology. So a carnivorous animal is one that eats meat. Now, there are hypercarnivores, people who eat more than 70% of their calories or foods from animal products. There are mesocarnivores who eat somewhere in the middle. I think it's 30 to 70%. And then there are herbivores who don't eat any meat at all. But really, as long as you're not a vegan, you're probably some form of carnivore. And I think trying to create this in-group, out-group fighting, similar to veganism in a lot of ways, is destructive overall. So it's important to remember that carnivore is not black or white. So now I'm going to run through some examples of carnivores and try to lay out their context, the way they practice carnivore, and maybe why it works for them around their goals, to show that there are a variety of ways this can work. You really have to find what works for you and maybe try to mirror one of these archetypes depending on your context and your goals. So we'll start with Shawn Baker, the modern king of carnivore. There he is with his ribeyes and his guns blazing. Large, athletic guy. He's a high-intensity glycolytic athlete. He's over 200 pounds. He's over 6 feet tall. I don't know his exact stats. He doesn't have any severe autoimmune issues. He talks about in the past he may have had sleep apnea and some other conditions, but overall, seems like a pretty average, healthy guy. He's definitely a high-performing athlete. His goals are primarily athletic performance and overall feeling and looking good. He has world records on the Concept 2 rower, deadlifts massive amounts of weight. Now he's trying CrossFit for the first time and trying to get good at that. His workouts are beastly. He is definitely on one end of the spectrum with regards to athleticism and body composition. So what does his diet look like given all that? Previously he's been Mr. Ribeye. He eats high protein. He eats 4 to 6 pounds of meat a day. His protein is over 300 grams. So he's eating well above a gram per pound of body weight. He's not trying to eat an especially high fat or ketogenic style of carnivore diet. And he also doesn't eat any organs at all and no carbs. So he's very strict. And he's pretty much eating only muscle meat and a lot of it. And that seems to work very well for him given his needs, his goals, and his past. Now let's look at someone who has a fairly different context. Mikhaila Peterson, Jordan Peterson's daughter. She's coming from a history of severe autoimmune issues. She had severe depression as a child. She had gut issues. She had arthritis dating all the way back to being a teenager. And she's had skin issues as well. Obviously, she's female. She's not particularly athletic, or at least doesn't have the kind of athletic goals that someone like Shawn Baker would. And her goals are health and functionality. She wants to be able to thrive and survive and live her life without being in and out of the hospital, visiting doctors, and just trying to live a normal life where she feels good and can do what she loves. So her diet looks very different than Shawn Baker. She's eating 1, maybe 1.5 pounds of meat a day, and it's very high fat to protein ratio, especially when she started. She's eating ribeyes. She's adding fatty cuts. She didn't eat organs originally. Now she includes some liver. She couldn't tolerate it. She also couldn't tolerate eggs. She has a lot of extreme food intolerances. Even she describes going to restaurants, and if they put a little bit of pepper or garlic powder on her steak, she can get very sick and severe reactions. And then now she fasts a lot. She fasts for days at a time, sometimes dry fasting without any water. And she has 0 keto foods, plants, carbs, any of that. So her context, very different than Shawn Baker, as you can see. Paul Saladino, fit, lean, athletic guy. He has a history of eczema. He may have had some other severe autoimmune issues, I don't know. He takes a very paleo-focused lens, an ancestral lens to the carnivore diet. His goals are optimal health, and especially he's much more focused on blood markers than someone like Shawn Baker. And he wants to feel and look good and perform well. So his diet is also a higher fat to protein ratio. He's more careful to keep protein around 1 gram per pound. He eats probably only 1.5 pounds per day of meat, much less than Shawn. And he eats nose to tail carnivore. So he really emphasizes getting all these micronutrients, all these different pieces of the animal. You can find a recent YouTube video where he talks about what he eats in a day, and he has, I think, 7 different organs laid out on a cutting board. And he mostly just lightly sears his meat, eats a lot of it raw, and recently he's been experimenting with adding some honey around workouts. Danny Vega, another high-intensity glycolytic athlete, 200 plus pounds, very lean, no severe autoimmune issues. So similar to Shawn Baker in a lot of ways. His goals are similar as well. But again, he's different than Shawn Baker in what exactly he eats. He especially at first ate a higher fat, more keto version of carnivore, closer to 2 pounds a day, not going up into the 4 to 6 range. He eats lots of organs and eggs. He loves eating nose to tail carnivore. And, you know, he mixes it up with regards to pork and salmon and some of these other animals. And then more recently, he's been doing more of a carnivore paleo approach, some carbs pre and post workout. And he finds that works really well for him and has improved how he feels, his satiety, his sleep, and his performance. So again, little bit of a different approach to carnivore. But again, I would still classify this as carnivore, even though he's eating some non-animal foods. Ella Bruce, another kind of extreme example. She's been on my podcast and others. She's a bodybuilder and power lifter. She's very lean and athletic. She does extreme high intensity workouts, weightlifting, etc. She wants to be a bodybuilder. She wants great body composition. She cares about athletic performance. And most importantly, she cares a lot about satiety because she's been on a lot of restrictive diets before, and she's just constantly thinking about food. She had some food disorders, but she's less focused on some of the like long-term health, although I think she still thinks about it, than some of these other people. And she eats a very high protein and low fat version of carnivore. So she's eating 3 to 5 pounds a day as, you know, a rather small female. She's not fasting. She's eating 2 to 4 times a day to try to get better muscle protein synthesis. And she's also doing some glycogen replenishment. So with her really low levels of body fat, she finds that a little bit of dextrose pre or post workout, or maybe some carbs like strawberries or fruit, makes a huge difference in her satiety and her ability to keep performing on these workouts. So she's still very much a carnivore, but her carnivore diet, you know, looks like ultra lean cuts of steak or even fish and egg whites versus, you know, fatty ribeyes or some of the other foods that someone who's not as focused on body composition might eat. Brett Lloyd, good friend of mine, came on my podcast. He was suffering from major depression for years, decades actually, and tried almost every pharmaceutical under the sun. He was very overweight and sick, and a carnivore diet has healed him in a lot of ways. And he's a super inspiring story. I'd encourage people to check him out. And his goals are to keep his depression at bay without medication, to lose weight and to feel healthy. And so again, very, very different than someone like Ella Bruce. And he's relatively even on the protein to fat spectrum. He eats probably around 2 pounds a day. He's not eating grass-finished organic beef like someone like Paul Saladino. He's eating Costco and Walmart beef and bacon, you know, making it work within his means. He likes his meat rather well cooked. He can't tolerate eggs or organs very well, and he doesn't fast, and he's very strict. He has no carbs, keto foods, plants, because that's what works for him, and that's what's keeping him moving towards his goals. Josh Blackburn, great guy. He's at Logical Links on Twitter and Instagram, founder of ketoanimalfoods.com, great website I encourage you to check out. He's had a lot of severe autoimmune issues, candida, others. He has a history of being overweight and using very restrictive diets like protein-sparing modified fast, very high protein, low fat, low carb diets to lose weight, and you know has suffered thyroid issues because of that. So his goals are to keep the weight off while having satiety and healing himself in some of these issues. So what's worked for him is very high fat version of carnivore, something he calls keto animal foods, where you're targeting this ketogenic ratio through eating what I believe is 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 fat by volume to meat. So if you actually look at your plate, you would have 2 times the amount of fat on the plate to actual meat. So really high fat carnivore, and that means the amount of meat he's eating per day is, you know, a pound. Really, it's low. He also likes organs a lot. He eats liver, but this is something that he's found he gets much better satiety and feels way better. A lot of his issues go away when he has protein really restricted and fat very high. So it's interesting to see some people like Ella Bruce can get really lean, feel more satiety with really high protein, whereas others have really high fat. And I found the same for myself, that, you know, my story is different than Kevin Stock or others. I have to experiment and find what works for me. So I think that's really the answer to some of these more nuanced questions. Last example here, I'm going to talk about the strong sisters, Ashley and Sarah. Everybody loves them. So they've recently come out and been very brave, and you know, of course, they're super intentional and well researched and smart. And they've been talking about hypothalamic amenorrhea, something they've been suffering with for a while. So winding back the clock, they had a lot of autoimmune issues historically, gut issues, and a lot of that, they say, comes from the way they ate in the past. So their goals before were to lose fat and gain muscle and be really performance oriented. They're both into heavy weightlifting and heal their autoimmune issues, get away from that. And carnivore has helped them do that. They've both been carnivore for over a year. And they were very strict carnivores, keeping carbs completely out, eating a nose to tail carnivore diet, rather higher fat, lower protein ratio, including things like raw beef suet and bone marrow to keep their fat high, eating very similar to Paul Saladino, tons of organs, nose to tail. But more recently, you know, they've come out and talked about the problems they've had with having a healthy cycle as women. And they've been very brave and transparent in their journey of adding in carbohydrates around their workouts throughout the day, adding safe carbs to heal their amenorrhea and try to let their bodies get into a more calm state. So, you know, many long-term carnivores would say, just keep calm and carnivore on. They're being willing to try something different that appears to be working very well for their bodies under the assistance of a coach. And these carbs are helping their bodies relax a little bit and undo some of that stress. And I really hope it works for them and they continue to get healthy. But just another great example of, you know, strict carnivore, a certain way of doing it didn't necessarily work for them. And they're being willing to experiment, which I really applaud. So what can we conclude from all this? Number one, as you can see, everyone is different. Very different approaches work for different people. I think a fundamental basis of being meat-based, including a lot of animal foods, is great. Don't be afraid of saturated fat. Don't be afraid of protein, red meat, cholesterol. But you have to try things. You have to see what works well for you and your situation. And that may be very different from some guru you follow or someone you really admire. So it's easy to ask them what they do or try to copy their template. Really, you have to start with a basis and then be honest with yourself about pulling some levers and seeing how it affects your health, your weight, how you feel, how satisfied you are. And then the next point, which is almost more important than all this self-experimentation, is try to help people. If you see someone trying something different, you see a woman trying to include carbs in her carnivore diet, don't criticize them. Don't try to call them out and say, you're no longer a carnivore, you're not keto. You know, that's really immature and rude, in my opinion. We should be here to support each other and prop each other up. And I think anyone who's examining their health and taking a critical lens to their diet at all, that's a rarity in today's society, and they should be applauded for it. So we're all in the same team here. Let's try to help people get healthier. And then lastly, building off that, you know, try to find and create community around this. Let's support each other. Let's answer each other's questions and you know, advanced carnivores help the earlier carnivores. Newer carnivores try to find people who can give you answers to your questions. And share what works for you. I think if carnivore diet is working well for you, you don't have to go out and shout it from the rooftops and tell everyone you meet in the street that they have to be a carnivore. But by being transparent about this working, this is how this movement spreads. The science is coming, thanks to folks like Shawn Baker, and there will be more studies around meat-based and carnivore diets, but it's going to take a very long time. And I think grassroots movement of people sharing their results and sharing their success is really what's going to move the needle forward and get more people willing to try and self-experiment. Start an Instagram account, go on a podcast, start a blog, do whatever works well for you, YouTube channel, and try to share your story and share how a carnivore meat-based diet has helped you. So here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. Folks can pause or take a screenshot, but here I've just tried to pull together a list. I'm sure I've forgotten a lot of great resources and people, so I apologize in advance. But these are books and podcasts which I found really helpful and have great information on a carnivore diet. And then lastly, looking for community, here are some websites, Facebook groups, and YouTube channels where you can learn more about carnivore. These are all great and places I go regularly. Again, I'm sorry if I've left people out, but hopefully these help folks either getting started or looking for more engagement in their carnivore life. So that's it. Thank you all so much for listening today. Really appreciate you all taking the time, and I hope this has been helpful. And have a great rest of your day and enjoy the rest of the presentations.